Good afternoon, everybody, and a very warm welcome to everyone who's joining us for today's panel on transparency in the forest sector. This is the fourth panel of Chatham House's Global Forum on Forest Governance, which has been taking place over this week. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank DFID for their support for this event. My name is Alison Hoare. I'm a Senior Research Fellow at Chatham House and I lead our research on forest governance. And one area where we've been focusing recently is on transparency and accountability, of which you will of course be hearing much more over the next hour and a half. But before we turn to the substance of this afternoon's discussions, I just wanted to run through a few practical issues and technical issues. So first of all, the event is available through Zoom. We're also live streaming the event and it will be available as a recording after the event as well. So the event is on the record and is not under the Chatham House rule. We do have simultaneous interpretation between English, French, Spanish and Portuguese. And you can select the language that you would like to hear the session in at the bottom of the toolbar. There's a small globe, and if you click on that, you can select the language. We also have an app available called Attendify, and you will hopefully have all received a link to this. And here you can see the presentations and interact with other participants. And finally, we would also welcome you to engage on Twitter, and the hashtag for the event is CHForests. So during the discussions, we would welcome your questions to the panelists. So you can submit those using the Q&A function. If you would like to ask the question in person rather than having me read it out, you can also do that. And that you can do through raising a hand on Zoom. And if you are watching this via live stream, you can also submit questions via Slido. And a final note on questions as well, if we would welcome your votes. If you see other people's questions that you would like to be answered, then if you click on that question, then it will go up the ranking. Okay, I think those are all the housekeeping issues. So letting us now turning to the substance of today's discussions. So the reason for focusing on this topic is that it's an area that has received a huge amount of attention and a lot of finance, in particular from donors, because transparency is seen as an important means of improving forest governance. And in particular as a means of enabling those with power, whether governments or the private sector, to be held to account. So this afternoon, we're going to hear about some of the changes that have been taking place in Liberia, Ghana, and Indonesia, and what impact the improvements that have been seen in transparency have had on enforcement and also in the management of forest sector revenues. We have 4 panelists this afternoon, and I will introduce each of them prior to their presentations. So first of all, we will be hearing from Tom Blomley. Tom has a wealth of experience in the forest sector, having worked for many years, in particular in East Africa, prior to setting up his consultancy firm. Now, Tom focuses on evaluations and project appraisals, and he's currently leading a team which is evaluating and seeking the lessons that have been learned from DFID's Forest Governance Markets and Climate Programme. So Tom is going to be talking about some of their findings from Liberia and Indonesia. So over to you, Tom.
Thank you very much, Alison. And everybody. As Alison has said, I'm working at the moment with a small team called the Policy Evaluation Learning Team, which is an integral part of the DFID FGMC program. And really, this team is really trying to understand, after a significant period of investment, not just by DFID, but many other donors and country governments and NGOs, what are we beginning to see as a sort of outcome level in terms of changing behavior, changes in governance, trade, and economics and benefit sharing. So what are the big results that are beginning to emerge as a result of this work around forest governance in producer countries? And in particular, this study that I'm going to talk a little bit about really tried to look in detail at the national timber legality assurance systems that are being set up in a number of countries, most far advanced in Liberia, Ghana, and Indonesia, with a view to seeing, is there anything we can learn from the data that's coming out of this? Are there trends that we can begin to see with regard to changing behavior of governments and private sector in changes in terms of benefit sharing and improvements in governance? And I think particularly important for this session is, having done that, are there ways in which this data, these new sources of data that are beginning to come out, can be improved and can be better communicated to different users, community level users, national level users, and international users, in ways that support these goals of increased transparency and accountability. So I will be presenting some results and I will be presenting some trends, but the point of the session really is not so much to look at whether it's going up or down in one particular country, but more to find out what kind of trends we can begin to explore with these new tools. So initially we looked at Liberia and Indonesia, and this is the kind of data that I think one can expect to find if you dig into these TLAS systems. Really similar types of data, but when you go down into the details, you've got different sort of parameters that are available. So within Liberia, we've got quite a lot of data around revenue, very detailed data around revenues being paid, right down to the level of individual companies, and the kind of revenues that are being paid, the taxes, the rental fees, the export taxes, and so on. And these are important because, as we'll talk about later, and I think some of the other panelists will talk about, it's very important in terms of calculating benefits owed to local communities through the benefit sharing arrangements. But interestingly, also in Liberia, there's a really good analysis of taxes paid and taxes owed, so fees owed by companies that you can actually begin to look at. In Indonesia, there's just a very simple aggregate of the kind of forest revenues that are collected per year. So the overall collection of forest revenues, that's through the Ministry of Finance. Company behavior in Liberia, you can see the kind of concessions that are available, the harvesting levels, and the export permits issued by individual company. And when you look across at Indonesia, you can see the overall level of companies complying with the national certification scheme, SVLK, that's operating in Indonesia. In law enforcement, there's very limited data on law enforcement in Liberia, other than the reports of inspections. But within Indonesia, the ministry set up a new website with a whole range of data around law enforcement effort, operations, the areas covered by these type of operations, and so on. Interestingly, in Liberia, the reports are available on a monthly level, but they are in hard copy only, whereas in Indonesia, actually, the reports are all available online, and they're available in a format that allows you to download them and process them and work with them fairly quickly. So there's very different levels of access and the way in which the data can be used and manipulated. So turning to the subject initially of revenue collection, just looking at Liberia, this was one graph that we put together of overall revenue that was collected since January 2015. And you can see it's a fairly spiky graph going up and down, and there are a few gaps in it. It doesn't really tell us a great deal, other than perhaps there's a gradual increase in revenues over the period. The dotted line is slightly sloping up. One level of interesting aspect here is you can aggregate this right down into different types of revenue. And one particular aspect of that is the land rental fees, which is a tax paid by concessions in recognition of the land area that they use, and a portion of which, that's 30% of that, is due to local communities. And the bottom graph here is actually something that we took from the Forest Trends report, which has just been, I think it's just been published today. And thanks to Forest Trends for that. But you can see a fairly steep slope there, 4.9 million, which was the total amount of land rental fees that were due, down to the amount that was actually collected, which was 27.7. The projection of that, which was 19.5 million, which was in theory owed to the community, but in actual fact, given that only 27 million was collected, there's 8.3, which is actually owed to the communities. But when you get right down to it, there was actually only 2.7 million paid out to the communities. So this comes, I think, from EITI data, and I think some of the others will talk about that, but it does show in fairly clear terms the discrepancy between what's owed and what's actually paid. So looking now at company behavior, again, we've got some really interesting data from Liberia on this. And this shows the different kinds of harvesting contracts that have been in operation since the beginning of 2015. And you'll see at the beginning there, the purple forest management contracts were by far and away the most common. These are, as far as I understand, these are the standard ways in which concessions are able to access timber. But there's been an increase. If you see the red area, the CFMAs, community forest management areas, have increased. The data is not quite perfect, but you can see that there is an overall increase right up to the end of 2018, where it was almost 100%. And this indicates timber that's coming from areas under community forest management. So from one perspective, this presents an opportunity to communities in that they can potentially get access to the benefits of forest management, forest harvesting. But I think more likely, I'm sure the other would like, this does also represent a great risk, because there's a number of documented concerns about capture by the timber companies of community interests, and very little in terms of real benefits flowing to communities. Looking at Indonesia, this is the rollout of the National Legality Assurance certification in Indonesia, the SVLK system. And you can see a very steep rise from 2013, both by area and by the number of concessions that were complying with this system. And then it plateaus off around 2016 up to 2019. So that shows a substantial increase. What's less clear perhaps is the total percentage of companies or the total area which would represent 100% compliance. So we're not able to see the relative area proportion of compliance. And then finally, turning to law enforcement, this is some data we pulled off some of the websites in Indonesia. You can see top left, law enforcement efforts significantly scaled up since 2016. You can see the kind of cases in the bottom left that are being pursued by government, steep increase in cases of illegal logging, and animals sales of trade in wild animals and so on. And on the bottom right, there's an interesting graph which shows actions taken towards current concession holders. And interestingly, although there are lots of lines going up, many of those actions are rather soft. They're sort of warning letters and written reminders and what's called government coercion. I'm not entirely sure what that means, but there's very, very little in terms of threat of revoking permits or actual cancellation of permits. So overall, I think this does show that the TLAS systems that are emerging in these countries, which I think have really been used in terms of having a look at particular companies or particular moments in time of compliance and so on. I think using a time series approach and assessing trends over time actually provides some quite interesting opportunities for looking at trends and patterns in terms of legality, compliance, law enforcement, and so on. So in summary, Liberia, there's a real diversity of data and actually a surprising level of transparency with regard to, going right down to the level of which companies are doing what and where they are in terms of arrears and so on. Some of the data around, the compliance of the companies by legality principles is there and is collected, but it's not publicly available. As I said, the fact that it's reported monthly gives a really nice time series analysis, which can show trends over time. It could be greatly improved by providing some kind of monthly or quarterly dashboard, perhaps, that brings together all this information in a more user-friendly format. And I think perhaps of most relevant to this discussion, while there is data there on land rental fees, which is, as I presented, links back to the sharing, I don't think it's currently in a format that's easily accessible or usable by community representatives and community monitors when looking for benefit sharing. And I'm sure this is something that others will come back to in subsequent presentations. So in Indonesia, it's really easily available. It's available for download, and analysis is super easy. It's just a question of downloading it in some Excel spreadsheets and playing around with it. It's difficult to get a sense of relative and overall levels of compliance as a proportion of the total number of companies or the total areas under concessions. That data is available, but it's not publicly available. There is a new portal being developed by the government now, which is beginning to show how issues of non-compliance are being addressed. So where things have been pointed out in assessments where companies have failed to comply, these are now being logged, and you can track how those issues are being addressed, what action's been taken by the company, and if nothing, no action is taken, what sanctions are imposed by the ministry. In Indonesia, even though there's significant amounts of independent forest monitoring, there's no publicly available data about those reports and what actions have been taken. So that would be something that could I think relatively easily be taken up and integrated within this. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks very much, Tom. That was an excellent introduction to the topic and really useful to have an overview of how transparency has been changing and seeing the difference between the situation in Liberia and Indonesia. So as you touch on, the question of usability of data is critical, and this is something that will come out in the following presentations. So we're turning first to Liberia, where we're having a joint presentation focused on community benefits. As Tom also mentioned, Forest Trends, in fact, today has just published a report which analyzes forest sector revenues in Liberia and their dissemination to communities. And that is now available on the Forest Trends website. And we've also posted a copy of the report on the Attendify app. So that report does include some of the data that Matthew and Andrew will be sharing in their presentation. So let me introduce our two panelists. So first, we'll be hearing from Matthew Wally, who is co-chair of the National Benefit Sharing Trust Board, which is the body established to manage and distribute funds from land rental fees to communities. And then Matthew will be followed by his colleague, Andrew Zellerman. So Andrew has worked for many years to advocate for community forestry in Liberia and for the rights of communities to receive benefits from forest exploitation. And Andrew is currently head of the Secretariat and National Facilitator of the National Union of Community Forestry Development Committees. So over to Matthew.
Thank you very much. So I will be presenting to you the background first, what we call the legal framework. In Liberia, there are several legal instruments that provide for transparency and accountability in the forest and land use sector. Key among them are the National Forest Reform Law of Liberia, it came on in 2006. Yep. So the Land Rights Act of 2018 and the Liberia Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative, ERTI 2007. The Liberia European Commission Partnership Agreement, which is the VBA, that started in 2013, and several other regulations. When we talk about the legal framework in Liberia, the forest management contract must meet all of the following requirements. The land involved must be identified as a potential area for concession. All right. The land involved must not include private land. The contract must require the holder to perform action necessary for long-term management, including inventory preparation of management plans. You have to show all these things. You also have to do your annual operation plans. The contract must require the holder to prepare all environmental impact assessment report required under the laws governing environmental protection in Liberia. The contract must require the holder to submit a business plan to the authority, meaning the Forestry Development Authority, and to demonstrate to the authority satisfaction that the holder has the technical and financial capacity to manage the forest sustainably. The contract must require the holder to establish a social agreement with local forest dependent communities, approved by the authority that defines these community benefits and access rights. This part is the strength of the community. It is the only time forest dependent community dwellers have the opportunity to sit face to face with government, companies, and other stakeholders to discuss what they really want to happen. The contract must require the holder to pay the government a fee that the holder pay in the concession process, in addition to any other applicable taxes and fee for the privilege of harvesting or using forest resources. The entity seeking the forest contract or permit for harvesting, processing, or exploiting logs or any timber product in Liberia is either a registered business or recognized by FDA as capable of obtaining and holding a forest contract or permit under the Liberian law. We are still in the legal framework. Applicants for forest lessons or concession holder are eligible to hold forest lesson and are now holder of certain position in government. You can't be an official in the government and hold forest lesson. That is prohibited on our law. When you go to the law, chapter 5, section 2, you will see exactly that these people are not to hold any forest lesson. On the Timor, the law states that even the president, the vice president, the speaker, and other government officials cannot hold a lesson for what we call just conflict of interest. With these laws that are available in Liberia, a forest community are benefiting for now under the land rental fee payment, the social agreement, because it's under the land rental fee payment that the government of Liberia will give the community 30%. My colleagues, Andrew Zelima, will go to the rest of the day, and you will see that the example that will be given in the presentation about FCA, how community are benefited. We have something that 23 CFDCs around the country, and the National Beneficiary Trust Board is working directly with the CFDC, passing on the benefit from government to them, what have been received. And the example that I've been giving in this presentation is just a fractional portion of what's going on across Liberia. You see FNCC, FNCA, FNCB, and the rest in the TSCs, you will see that people are doing contract from the benefit received from the 30%. Also, social agreement communities are also benefiting. There are challenges, and Andrew will mention some of those challenges. But the greater portion of the challenges that we are facing in Liberia is for the money to come from the fund ministry to the beneficiary trust board and then pass on to the community. That's the biggest challenge we are faced with in Liberia. Thank you very much, and I will pass the time over because this is a joint presentation. I will pass the time over to my colleagues, and Mr. Lima will continue from there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, and thank you to Matthew for the legal overview of forests in Liberia. That those are the some of the legal requirements he just spoke of, and I will continue with him looking at some of the data. This presentation is being concentrated on transparency and accountability in the forest sector. Some of the data that are available for us to see and some of the challenges that are there for promoting transparency and accountability. So going further, we have two key data we call primary data that provide for community benefits, and I will focus on them and taking one company that are provided some of the data, and also some of the companies are in areas that we have captured on the data that are being made available. So the key data is the data on area-based fee. Most often we refer to as the land rental fee. These are fees that are paid per hectare. For forest management contract is $2.50 annually. For timber sale contract is $1.25 per hectare annually. plus annual contract administrative fees at the FMC is $1,000 per annum, and TFC is $500. The second data that also provide for community benefit is on production-based fees, which is mostly concentrated on cubic meter fees of log harvested. The fees are most often agreed in social agreement. These are agreements signed between the logging companies and the community affected by the forest operation or the concession. So we have taken one company called Alpha Logging and Wood Processing Incorporated, who have been able to provide a lot of data on cubic meter harvested for the past 7 years. And this data have been provided through the community on a monthly basis. And that is the reason why they are the only company that are providing kind of data in terms of promoting transparency and accountability in the sector. So you will see from this slide that between 2013 up to 2020, a total volume of logs harvested have amounted to 479.617 cubic meter with a fees of $248,219.43 to the community. Even though not all have been paid in 100%, but once they have been calculated and the community knows it's an obligation or debt if the company have not paid all. But the availability of the data can tell you how much fee the communities are entitled to. So, and it's, like I said, it's provided on the monthly basis to the CFDC, that's the Community Forestry Development Committee. On this company, on the other side of the data, I talk about the land rental fee, which is the area-based fee. This company is also the only company who have provided or paid the higher amount of the land rental fee between 2009 up to 2018. You will see they have paid up to 90% of the land rental fee, amounting to $1,892,600 as area-based fees. The community is arranged in a legal framework. They are entitled to 30% of this land rental fee that the government of Liberia collects, and the share of the 30% is sent through the National Community Beneficiary Trust. So you will see that collecting $1,892,600 by the government of Liberia, the government transfer or redistributed the 30%, just 63% out of 567,780 that were to be community share or 30% share for communities. The community received only $357,152.27. So the government still owe from this data 27% of what they have collected or the company have paid to government. You see the impact of this payment to community. There are 23 community forestry development committees in Liberia. And these 23, out of them, the funding, the 30% share that government have paid to the National Beneficiary Trust, because it is, the communities are benefiting based on the amount company pay 30% of it. This community in the FMC Area A have received the highest amount because the company have paid the highest amount. So out of 46 community projects that have been implemented through the National Community Beneficiary Trust Board by the Community Forestry Development Committee, this community in FMCA have 12 of those projects that are being implemented. So 26% of the projects are being implemented by the community from the land rental fee. This community in FMC or these communities in FMCA have the highest impact in terms of project benefits. So the availability of the data and also the higher payment of the company have had that impact on communities having more projects implemented to benefit them. So if you look at among the companies, there are companies that have higher area cover, and once you have higher area cover, as a company, you have higher land rental fee to pay. So we have 3 of the logging companies that have higher area and also owed the higher land rental fee arrears. Between 2016 and 2019, these 3 companies were invoiced by the SGS or the FVD. The SGS is responsible, was responsible. They were implementing project. They are still doing some work with FDA to track all revenue. So they invoice. Currently, the new system in the FDA is the legality verification department that are doing most of this work. So they invoice the companies, and the companies pay to the Liberia Revenue Authority. Between 2016 and 2019, they have invoiced these 3 companies $4,901,345 United States dollars as arrears. But between the period, the 3 companies pay just $487,276.27, just 10% of the arrears that were invoiced during the period. So you see the kind of data to show how some of these companies are still in huge arrears. And if you look at the Forrester report, you see the total amount arrears. But just looking at the 3 companies with bigger concession areas, you will agree that there are huge areas in terms of land rental fees. So what are some of the challenges? And there will be a slide to come to give you a summary of the area-based fee from Forrest Stern. I'm sure the host will share that later. But let's look at some of the challenges. The land rental fees data are usually provided by the Liberia, it should be, the fees are collected, right, by the Liberia Revenue Authority, but it is the FDA who should make it public. It is required. If you look at the background of the presentation, in the legal framework, you see what we are talking about, the legal area for requirement for these, for FDA and the company, how they should report these data. So because the FDA and the companies are not providing this data, so it makes it difficult to have an accurate data in terms of what they owed and what they are to pay. Also the issue of cubic meter harvested data, this is not often available publicly. The FDA or the companies are not providing this data. So it makes it difficult for us to understand what are the actual amount of cubic meter fees that should be paid to communities. LERT, that's the Liberia Extractor Industry Transparency Initiative. Their reports also have strong challenges. They provide report after every 2 years. So, and you will see that before the 2 years, what are the information or what are the data, you don't get it. And also in their report, they are not recording what government is redistributing to communities as 30% share of land rental fees. And clear data on cubic meter fees companies pay to communities. Not all of the logging companies are also regularly reporting to the LERTR. And you will see that also companies and government are not fully applying the laws that could promote transparency and accountability. In conclusion, what we think should be done is to promote greater transparency is when the companies and government commit themselves to the legal requirements. It's spelled up in the law how the company should report twice a year, how the FDA should make public all of these data. So if these laws are applied, then transparency and accountability will be promoted in Liberia. And you also see that not much data is available for the volume or value of logs harvested, which makes it difficult, like I said, to understand clearly the contribution that should be made to the communities through cubic meter fees. And if companies provide monthly harvest data to make it public, the fees to be paid to communities will be known. The government or the FDA must also ensure that all funds collected should be redistributed according to the law or regulations. These are spelled up in the law how the land rental fees should be distributed, and the data should be made public to promote transparency and accountability. Just to look at a few of the projects from the area we talk about, we said 12 of those 46 projects were being implemented in this FMCA, where we have more data coming up and also more fees being paid. These are the kind of impact we think if the companies and the government commit themselves to providing or living by the law and providing the required benefits to community, there will be more greater impact. And I will just stop here to share until Alison can share the slide on land rental fee areas that are coming from forest terms in their report that will also be launched today. Thank you.
Thank you very much to both Matthew and Andrew. Very interesting presentation, much food for thought. And it will be also very interesting to compare the situation in Liberia with that in Ghana, which we're going to hear about next. So we are turning next to our final panelist, Jean Birikorang, who is a natural resource economist with over 30 years of experience of working in the forest sector. He's also worked on a number of occasions with Chatham House, and that has included this current research that he is about to share with us. Just before I hand over to Jean, I would like to remind everybody to please do submit any questions you have via the Q&A for the discussion in the final half hour. Okay, so over to Jean.
Thank you, Alison. Let me say I inadvertently have put the wrong slide. Not that it's so wrong, it's my original slide, but I know how I'm going to manage it. But for the sharing, I believe Alison would give you the version 2 that I have. So I can speed through my slides. Okay, I need to jump this. I want to go back quickly. Just a moment. Excuse me. Yeah. Now I'm making a presentation on the Ghana wood tracking system and the social responsibility agreement. A little bit on the context. Ghana had actually been using a paper-based wood tracking system for decades for timber production and sales. But this system had a lot of weaknesses. And these weaknesses, of course, with paperwork, with so laborious, and we couldn't even trace infractions. And because of that, both companies and government officials took advantage of the weaknesses, and the result was there's a lot of corruption. On the side of the government was very little oversight, and of course you couldn't blame the government too much because it was quite overwhelming. For this, the wood tracking system that was actually initiated in between 2009 and completed in 2019 through the electronic system and transparency has actually removed these kind of weaknesses, which were also causing a lot of illegal logging in the formal sector. Now, in the case of the SRAs also, even though the law had said that we should pay SRAs to communities, that is social responsibility agreements, these were taken for granted. And communities were not having access to this. Originally, there are original distribution of forest revenues, but none of it trickled down to communities. But by 2016, the lack of community awareness and so on also outstanding that through the influence of the BPA, some reforms started to appear in that. But as a result of the weaknesses in the SRAs themselves, traditional authorities who were landowners laid claims on these forest revenues and the SRAs as coming from their lands. And so communities lost out. So with the VPA's influence, a lot had been done, and the government has also created the desire that the SRAs should actually, implementation should conform to law. So that was the influence that the VPA had on that one. Now, through the VPA process, a lot of information has been generated, but the fundamental thing about the wood tracking system is that because every data must have a legal backing, all data that enters the WTS system is supposed to be considered as default statement. And therefore, anything that runs counter to that means what they call discrepancies. And I think for all actors, they were actually informed about this and they were aware. So all actions which government and non-government actors took had to bear this in mind. Now, the various information that runs through the wood tracking system, it all starts from the forest stock, through the forest gate, through the transportation of round wood to mills, and then all from the mills to the export sector. And you could see listed all these, the timber permitting, the forest management, so that those end users who are quite important in the areas and find them very useful are listed there. The end users and the purpose. For instance, if you're talking about the timber permitting, the public is also interested in that. And it being there's an online portal for that purpose that has been established through cooperation between civil service, civil society, and the Forestry Commission. So all the way down to the planning and operations involving timber companies. Data are generated and the purposes for which they are indicated over there. The companies, for instance, will use these data for their own operations, and then eventually the timber validation department will also use it for verification. And as I was saying, midstream, that is where you have the processed timber, and you have the Forest Service Division that also supervises production by timber companies, TIDD that certifies the supply chain of wood products to the export, and then the TVD that will take this information, and at the export end, where the TVD will also use the export permit. The beauty about it is they will use it to reconcile what had actually happened in the forest. Gone were the days when timber species will be changed and so on, so that export data were purely contradictory to what was actually appearing in the stock data. So it's a big improvement that has happened. As we come to the SRAs, as I said, the SRAs information that have been provided to make it work are the guidelines issued by RMSC, that's the Resource Management Service Center of the Commission, and the Forest Service Department, Forest Services Division, and the timber companies. They will make use of the RMSC would publish compartment yield data together with estimates of how much is supposed to come from the fellings, and the 5% that is to be paid is calculated, and everybody is aware of that. So civil society has also been using this information for the advocates. Communities are very much aware of what to do. So all the darkness that operated around the SRAs before now no longer happened. Companies and communities will sit and negotiate amicably and transparently. There is also the revenue aspects where the WTS is synchronized with the revenue software system that the Commission engages in order to calculate whether timber companies are paying or not. The Ministry of Finance is also interested in this kind of information because whatever monies go to the Forestry Commission, the Ministry of Finance considers it as part of its consolidated fund. Even though the money is retained by Forestry Commission, the Ministry of Finance is interested because they eventually provide a total budget. And so they consider that one. If the Forestry Commission does not perform well, the Ministry of Finance penalizes them for that. That's the beauty of it over there. Now, let's look at the impacts of all that has been happening from the data sharing and transparency. There are generally, this smart data, as I have indicated, is something that everybody knows about. The general result is that with improved efficiency in the system, both timber companies and the government are all benefiting because they are reducing costs. Availability and access to pre-audit data and post-audit queries and so on has actually benefited civil service to set its strategy and agenda with the government. Now let's look at some 3 key areas of these impacts. First of all, there's the government processes that has actually helped to reduce the compliance cost of companies at the pre-login stage and also along the supply chain. This is interesting because formerly, before we had this WTS, companies considered it cheaper to bribe than to comply. Now it's not happening. Now, if you come to the other second aspect of it, there's improved enforcement response from the Ghana Forestry Commission and administrative oversight. Staff have been warned that if they do not comply with rules and regulations, they'll be penalized. The 3 warning, they have been warned, giving indications that 3 warning letters given to them would actually be equivalent to invocation of a dismissal. So that's a warning for them. That has helped to reduce opportunity for corruption among staff and improve FC's own oversight of management. Now, on the side of the companies, there are huge penalties. For example, one district that actually cost the company for about 100 cubic meters, about 7 times the stumpage fees. Excuse me, I need to go back to my previous slide. Yeah, just about that. Excuse me. I'm back on track. Yeah, so companies have become aware of this, and this is having a big impact. For instance, between 2015 and 2018, the number of companies audited increased from 41 to 186. One would have assumed that the CARs, or what we call excuse me. Oh, I need to go back again. Excuse me. Sorry. Yeah, the CARs actually represent the correction action required or request from the Forestry Commission that is actually resolved from the audits, and the company are supposed to answer. These processes that have been going on with the companies increasing 41 to 186 audited. The average CAR per company has declined from 1.9 to 0.9 between 3 years, between 2015 to 2018. So we can see a very serious impact that companies are beginning to behave. Then also for civil society, they are better informed about the consequential strengthening of advocacy has led to a joint Forestry Commission and civil society establishment of an online portal to the WTS, all because of the interaction between the two data sharing and transparency. Now, on social responsibility agreement, as I was saying, that there's been quite a big improvement with RMSC actually disseminating information about volumes and values of SRAs that are supposed to be available in the districts. The RMSC has also, there's been a joint Forestry Commission and civil society workshops and community forums that have been organized to sensitize communities on how to negotiate for SRAs. RMSC has also issued guidelines to facilitate the negotiation of SRAs. They have also engaged with traditional authorities who have actually been hijacking the SRAs for them to understand that their revenues as royalties will be protected and that they should also support communities to have SRAs. So these they have agreed to do. On the impact, of course, we are seeing a lot of clarity about available SRAs. The private companies and communities are amicably settling their SRAs. There's also transparency in community decision making as to what to use SRA monies for. And the traditional authorities, as I'm saying, have also supported it. It's been a substantial increase in SRAs that have been issued. Two good examples have been picked from two districts. In one of the districts, it's increased from, SRAs have increased from 3 in 2017 to 15 in 2019. In the other district, it has doubled almost from 11 to 22 between 2016 and 22. So we can see the impact of the SRAs. The overall impact is assembled from a common perspective of government, private sector, and civil society. Everybody believes that there's been a drastic reduction in illegal logging activities by companies. And then SRAs are also contributing to greater social benefits to the affected communities. And in fact, communities are said to be partners in illegal logging, and therefore, if they are also having incentives from this, so it is expected that their support will also go to protecting the forest. There are other governance factors that have also helped, other than the transparency that we have in this. The BPA flag process itself has actually enabled significant progress in the WTS and SRAs, as I've already indicated. There's been some institutional and legislative reforms as well, but the BPA from its inception has also conceptualized having the timber validation department, which is now the key agency controlling and managing the wood tracking system. There's also been the multi-stakeholder implementation committee that has actually provided a platform for all stakeholders to have a consensus on how to move. And in fact, that has given an advantage to civil society, giving them a voice, increasing their leverage in advocacy. There's also been the enactment of Regulation LI 2254 that actually cites the establishment of a timber validation committee, which is purely holds an oversight over the TVD's performance, and it's also an ombudsman that would investigate complaints and then provide corrective actions that have to be taken. There's also been improved capacity at the FC that have facilitated sustained progress in rolling out the WTS and supporting the transparent SRAs. Now, how we ask a question, how can international partners also best support improved accountability? The first is that we need CSOs also believe that they need support to build their capacities. Presently, they are weak, and if you ask how is it with them with their strength, they say, well, CSO is as strong as expanding. So that tells a lot of story about them. The second thing is it is believed that international partners have to be more proactive in demanding reforms of government and to shift away from diplomacy and demand real accountability for fund utilization. And then on donor coordination, there's this sensitive issue that, for instance, if government is acting unfavorably in one sector, whatever is happening in other sectors, we could put brakes to whatever assistance is being given to other sectors. If compliance in forestry sector is not working, then we've got to make sure that some triggers operate in such a way that the donors begin to look at the country-wide programs rather than sector by sector. So if there's poor governance in forestry sector, then assistance going to agri sector, for instance, can stop until corrective actions happen in the forest. This is quite a radical approach that we are recommending. Well, in conclusion, the WTS has also been beneficial in enforcing compliance, and at the same time, the relationship between government and civil society has improved. SRAs are now negotiated and signed by communities also before logging operations can commence. And even the government itself has become very proactive with giving information about how SRA funds are also being utilized. And so far, about 11 out of 36 of the forest districts have provided comprehensive data. That's a good performance, about 33% within a year or so. Then the future expectation is that further improvements in the transparency will facilitate closer monitoring of SRAs so that continued progress with implementation of these agreements could be achieved. This will be the end of my slides. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much, Gene.
Thanks.
So yes, really interesting presentation. We've had a lot of information there, and I wanted to please continue to type in any questions that you have for the panelists. I wanted to kick off the discussions with a question that I had. So firstly, so in all three countries, the improvements that have been seen in the availability of data have resulted, I think, from a mix of international initiatives, so both the VPA and the EITI in the case of Liberia, as well as civil society advocacy. So I'd be interested in hearing from all of you as to what more you think the international community could do to push for more transparency. So I guess particularly in a context where maybe the government has publicly made a commitment to improving transparency, but the reality has yet to be seen. Perhaps if I could turn to you first, Tom.
Yeah, thanks, Alison. I mean, I think there are a number of specific things that can be done. In terms of increasing opportunities for transparency, I think the VPA teaches us that there's real benefit in creating a space for civil society to engage with government and national actors to engage together to identify new opportunities and push for issues such as transparency. And that does tend to have more effect than donors, European Commission, DFID, whoever it is coming from outside and pushing that kind of agenda. So I think that's been a really important element of the VPA process, has been that creation of space and allowing those sorts of things to emerge through a national process. Where they are in place and where those issues have yet to be realized, I think, you know, as has been said, I think that the building of capacity of civil society is really, really critical. And you know, we've seen some real successes in countries like Indonesia, where a really strong civil society has been able to take the government to court and to be able to use legal provisions around freedom of information to force the hand of government and to some degree private sector to release data, whether it's around concession areas or infringements or whatever. And this has had major impacts, certainly in Indonesia, in terms of reversing company and government behavior. So I think that civil society action coupled with legal actions and resorting to legal channels is a really strong process.
Thanks, Tom. Andrew and Matthew, do you have anything to add on this point?
Yes, I think some of the things that the international community could do in promoting transparency, one is comparing national government to implement laws that are being agreed, both the international agreement like the VPA that call for greater transparency in the sector. The international community needs to compare the government to enforce the law. The problem we have is law enforcement. And part of it is also ensuring that the companies that are not living up to the law, it should be penalized. But national government and also the international partners, if these companies are not living up to the agreement, they should be punished. Part of it is also creating capacity for civil society organizations and the community members to be informed of the laws and the procedure for either taking companies to court or taking government to court on things that are required by law for them to do. So the international community could provide some empowerment for civil society organizations and community members so they are able to engage the companies and the government.
Thank you, Andrew. And Matthew as well? Any comments at this stage?
Okay. I think Andrew said it all. But just to add, My nephew is living in a concession area. Like for instance, EJ&J concession area in Riverside. And as he said, EJ&J did not even inform the community people. They have stopped operation. EJ&J has written the government of Liberia that indeed they are not able to operate anymore. Up to now, the community is not being informed officially 2.5 years ago now. The social agreement is there. The company is now working. Everything is just quiet, and no one is speaking with the community. So as CFBC chair, the pressure is on us. So our main problem for us in Liberia is the implementation of our laws. Okay, and so I will also join that the international panel need to put some pressure on the government of Liberia to make sure that government will listen. When you talk about implementation, it is the government that's supposed to implement the law. FDA is there. The laws have been broken. Nothing has been said. So if there's pressure coming from elsewhere on our government, we are sure that implementation will be on the book.
Okay, thank you, Matthew. And Jean, I mean, you covered this point to some extent in your presentation. Anything further to add from your perspective?
I'm making a statement that is generic, not just specific to Ghana. And that is international partners and civil society would have to work a special strategy to deal with the problem of impunity. That's exactly what I think it's a big challenge. And what might be very difficult for international partners to do, civil societies can be their voice, but they need to develop their capacity. Yeah, and that one I agree with Tom excellently. That's what I would say.
Okay, thank you. So we've got quite a few questions coming in. There's sort of leading on from this point to some extent is, so we have a question that was following up on the presentations from Liberia. This is from Dr. Manu Haran, who's asking if there's, or what the reason is for why the government failed to collect the money from the logging companies and how this can be addressed. And linked to that, we also have a question from Ricardo Miranda Leitao, who asks, what are the strategies for charging companies once an illegality is identified? So perhaps turning again to, perhaps first to Andrew.
Thank you. We don't have a clear answer of the reasons why the government failing to collect the funds. The government could be in the right position to answer why they are not. So that's why we are saying the international partners need to take this issue with the national government. Why these funds are arrears owed by companies and you are responsible to collect, you are not collecting. What we can say is that the government is not, the only reason is the government is not enforcing the law. So if the law is enforced, these collections will be made. So charges are laid out in the law. If a company don't pay tax that they have to pay annually, there are remedies to that. There are penalties spelled out in the National Forest Reform Law of 2006 and 8 co-regulations. So they are all spelled out in the law. It's only for enforcement. So all we can say the reason is that the government is not enforcing the law. Sometimes a part of the punishment is if the company fail to pay taxes, including benefits to communities, it constitutes termination of the contract. But it is only the government who have the authority or the right to terminate this contract if the companies are not living up to the contract agreement.
Thank you. Yes, and I was interested to hear Jean's comment that that there's an incentive has been created for I think it was for the Forestry Commission to actually collect forest revenues, because they are then penalised by central government if that doesn't take place, which I think is an interesting model. I don't know if any of the panelists have views on, I don't know if that it would be an option in Liberia, perhaps. Matthew, would you any comments on that? Are you there, Matthew? No, I will move to another question. And he's unmuted. Did you hear my question?
I didn't get your question, please.
So I was, I noted Jean's comment that in Ghana, if the Forestry Commission does not collect forest revenues, it is penalised by central government. So I wondered if there was any similar arrangement in Liberia, or if you thought that type of approach of creating incentives for different government departments to improve their collection of revenues could be valuable perhaps in Liberia.
Yes. The issue in Ghana is a little bit different from us in Liberia.
Mm-hmm.
There's a company called Laborfor being employed by the government to issue invoices as to what the companies are doing. So the sole responsibility is left with the government to collect the taxes. So there are two things happening on our side. Some of the taxes are collected, but the portion that's supposed to come to the community is not coming to the benefit sharing trust board. Now, one. Then secondly, government is not strong enough to collect all of the taxes. Companies to the government will sign different contracts. They will go to different memo also of the law. The companies will bring suggestions and they will say, because of this situation in our country, we can pay, but it will be by installment. So they will go to different arrangements. So we don't really know what can community or other people do. Said in the beginning, as we said, before even the party could release the first $1 million US to community, there were protests, there were pressure groups from different areas before we could get our first $1 million US from the past government. Since this government came to power, the beneficial interest board has not received a cent for community, because we're supposed to receive it as a beneficial interest board and then we pass it on to community. But since this government came to power, we are not receiving a cent.
So if I would add up to the question that you asked, the answer is yes. We think just an action need to be taking place in Liberia. Government need to penalize some of these companies that are in areas to show the level of transparency and commitment to the law of the country. And also the agreement with international partners like the VPA. The VPA call for transparency and accountability. So if companies are not living up to the law or the enforcement of the law, then the government must take action against the companies. But we do not have a situation like that, like James talked about from Ghana. So that should happen in Liberia, that it will show the commitment government have made with international partners, that they will ensure that the laws are implemented to benefit the nation and the community members. So I think just things need to happen in Liberia.
Okay, thank you. I would like to turn next to Rosalind Fozua Ajay, who I understand would like to ask a question in person. So Rosalind, perhaps I think we'll ask one of your questions. I'll leave it to you to decide which one, as you'd noted down too.
Thank you very much, Alison, and it's wonderful to connect with everyone here. So what my question really is considering that initiatives or studies on transparency or the transparency landscape has changed because we are getting into more non-consumptive uses of the forest and getting into more protective uses of the forest, talking about climate change initiatives. Can any of the panelists give us an overview of how the former transparency arrangements are emerging into these new transparency arrangements? I can give an example. For example, if you consider the REDD+ discussions, a lot of transparency structures are being put in place in terms of benefit sharing so that communities receive their benefits directly without any third-party handlers. So how do they see this evolving vis-a-vis the consumptive transparency arrangements that we are all used to? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rosalind. Jean, should I turn to you first?
Yes, I can. Yeah, yeah, Rosalind, I said, yeah. She made reference to REDD+ initiative, and my first response is, yeah, the REDD+ itself has been another initiative, the climate change initiative that is supposed to complement even VPA, and the two sides are supposed to be they are supposed to have synergies. Yes, but now you're talking about the non-consumptive aspects of forestry and protection. This is a dicey issue in the sense that Ghana itself is still yet to go into what I call the payment for ecosystem services. And of course, like we've done with the VPA, it's a lot of analysis that still has to go through the REDD+ process. Because typically in Ghana, and I believe it is a matter of economics, for instance, we are talking about benefit sharing. I myself have a problem with the benefit sharing thing. In other words, in Ghana, we look at total revenues and how we are sharing. We are not even looking at what are the costs that communities, for instance, bear. For instance, in protection of the forest, they bear costs. The community, all the community forest bodies that have been set up, they also bear costs. And therefore, if you're talking about benefit sharing, it must be net of costs. But when it's absolute revenue sharing, then still communities will lose out. But I believe the REDD+ itself is a good initiative in the sense that consultation and participation has been at the forefront, and I believe something will come out of it. REDD+ is still in its infancy. They've only just started to see what they can do with the cocoa forest initiative, and I believe if we sit to do the thorough analysis and just move away from the traditional revenue sharing that is based on the existing statutory laws, that will not help. This is my intervention.
Thank you, Jean. Tom, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll probably steer clear of the whole REDD debate, but I think what's coming out really clearly from the lessons around benefit sharing and transparency in Liberia and Ghana is that you know, it's important to have the right kind of data. So headline figures about total amounts being paid may be useful to a degree, but if communities are really to have the tools to be able to effectively hold private sector and government to account, they need very specific levels of data and very specific kinds of data. And some of the examples that Andrew was presenting in his presentation I think really points to that fact. If you look at what comes out of the monthly TLAS reports from Liberia, you get a figure of total volumes being exported by individual companies. But as he pointed out in his presentation, the amount paid by timber companies is linked to the total volumes harvested. And that data is not available. And just by looking at how much a company exports doesn't actually tell you how much they've harvested. So there's a conversion issue there and an area of discrepancy in terms of agreeing. So unless you get a situation like he presented, where a company actually comes forward and gives that data willingly and provides that on a monthly basis, it's extremely hard for civil society actors to hold those players to account. So yeah, I think it really boils down to having the right kind of data in the right format and in a timely manner as well. If it comes out 2 years later, that may not be particularly helpful. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. And Matthew or Andrew?
Yes, in Liberia, the REPLUS project or program is still in the readiness stage, but experience from other beneficiary mechanisms still create doubts in how REPLUS beneficiary will be. Currently, Liberia have not developed beneficiary mechanism for the REPLUS. So even though it's another new opportunity for community to benefit from non-consultative from the forest, but how are the communities going to benefit directly from the REPLUS initiative? Instead of question around, because up to now there is no clear beneficiary mechanism put in place for communities. But we think it's another good opportunity for benefits to community.
Thank you, Andrew. I think we have time for one more question, which I will put to all of you. So, well, there's a couple of related questions. So first question from Lawrence Lackman Singh. He asks, when it comes to fighting corruption, transparency is an important element. Have the panelists identified other important elements that will lead to increased accountability? Linked to this, Patrice Camquimo PM says, transparency is good, but not an end in itself. What are key enabling factors for ensuring that transparency can lead to accountability? So I think if we combine those questions, what I will ask each of you to tell us is, what would you like to see in the next 5 years, or what one big improvement you would like to see as an enabling factor, I suppose, that will help to ensure that transparency in Liberia or Ghana or Indonesia will lead to better accountability? Matthew, let me start with you this time, and then I'll turn to Andrew, and then Tom, and finally Jean. Okay, so Matthew.
Okay.
You're wonderful.
When it comes to transparency in Liberia, REPLUS, as Andrew was saying, most of the time we have had different meetings. We have attended national platforms meetings. And our thinking is that there should be no new arrangement when it comes to benefit. We are thinking that the same procedure, the same format will be used for REPLUS so that community will benefit. That is the thinking we have. When it comes to transparency in Liberia, it has to start with the government, because for the community people, they look up to the government for implementation. Because when you talk about transparency, we have to implement the law to the letter. make people to be responsible for what they are committed to. There are contracts signed between the government and the companies. There are social agreements signed between the companies and the communities. But when a company refuses to pay like kilometer fee, like scholarship fee, and other things, it is the government through the FDA that's supposed to force that company to pay. That's what we call transparency. All right. And so we again go back to the government. Communities and other civil society in Liberia are on the back of the government to make sure that these things happen. But it sometimes can be difficult. When I was listening to the comparison from Indonesia and our country, I saw that their reports are available online. And our reports, we can strive to get our reports, whether if we're invoicing a company or a data from a company about how many kilometer logs that they are harvested. For you to get the information, you have to struggle. Although there is an app that says freedom to information, but you know it's still difficult. You have to really push before you can get information.
Thank you. Andrew, very quickly, your thoughts.
Okay, so yeah, what we want to see in the next 5 years, we can see the clear, the good example from Indonesia. The availability of data is key in moving forward, promoting transparency and accountability. So what we want to see in the next 5 years, that companies are committed to providing data on their operations, including payments and harvest of timers from the forest sector. If that is done, and also government is committed in providing the data in a form that will be accessible to communities and partners. If that is done, we think transparency and accountability will be on course. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Next to Tom.
Yeah, I think it's the $1 million question, isn't it? That you know, transparency is a necessary condition for accountability, but there's lots of other things that get in the way of actually realizing accountability. And I think effectively we're talking about rule of law, a functioning rule of law. How do you get rule of law? Well, that's if we knew the answer to that question, I think we probably wouldn't be having this meeting. I think going back to some of the examples again from Indonesia, I think the law courts provide an opportunity. It's something that's been used a lot in Indonesia. I'm not sure how much it's been used in Liberia or in Ghana in terms of pushing these impunity issues, transparency and accountability issues. But it's proven to be a very powerful tool in some countries, and maybe something to think about. Thanks.
Thank you, Tom. And a final brief word from Eugene, please.
Thank you, Alison. I'm always on the same wavelength as Tom, as the functioning rule of law. But there's one fundamental thing that I'd like to mention over here, and that is, I put a question first. Why must it be the monopoly of lawyers to draft laws? In Ghana, for instance, before civil society and the public or other stakeholders would sit to have a look at a document, the draft law is already there, and they are asking a few questions about how you think it's going to work. At that stage, you are not going to affect the various clauses in the law. And from our own institutional experience, try to reverse this in some years back in ensuring that the ministry itself drafted the LI 1721. And even though the Attorney General was not happy we are taking over their job, they did enact the thing as we required, because they didn't understand timber And if we would get civil society to start looking at how to read draft and do other things, then we'll break that monopoly. Otherwise, when the law is sealed, it provides opportunity for the impunity to happen, and then what we call the disguised non-accountability and that kind of thing. And I believe that is a paramount question. Is about rule of law and how to break the monopoly of lawyers, to get civil society to start working on these things right from the beginning together with lawyers, so that whatever comes out there is 100% ownership of draft statements. I'm done.
Okay, thank you, Jean. Some good thought-provoking questions to end the session on there. I do apologise to all of those who sent in questions. We are over time, so my apologies that we have not been able to respond to everybody. But thank you everybody for taking part, and a particular thank you to all of our panelists. It's been a really interesting discussion. I would like to just conclude by reminding everybody that we do have one more panel taking place on Friday, where we'll be discussing emerging and radical ideas for forests, and that will start at 11 AM UK time. And later today, we will be releasing some videos that will feed into that discussion on nature-based solutions, nature needs half, and convivial conservation. So I hope that many of you will be able to join us for the discussions on Friday. So thank you once again, and we hope that you can join us later in the week.